Hello friends, welcome to my channel. In this video, we will be talking about how to configure Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, better known as MDT, and how to capture a reference image. So I have gone ahead and installed this MDT. It's fairly simple. You right click and install, and of course you need to have the administrator privilege. Right now it's asking me whether I want to change, repair or remove, and that's because it's already installed. So I'll just click on cancel because I don't want to do anything here. And I say finish. Now when you click on your start menu, you will see something like Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. Expand that and you should see something like a deployment workbench. Click on it because now we are going to configure the deployment workbench. Alright, so this is the first screen you come across as soon as you open the MDT console for the first time. As you see, there is literally nothing here. So we can right click and do a new deployment share, but I want to see what Microsoft documentation says about it. Alright, so here it talks about create and share the logs folder. So the first thing it says is to create a log folder. Now remember, I only have one drive, so instead of creating the logs on D drive, I'll be creating it on C drive. And create a log folder. Next thing you want to do is you got to share this folder. You can choose to include only a selected group of people or provide everyone if you're again configuring it in a lab kind of environment like I've got it here. So I've got my log folder shared. Let's create the MDT build share. Open the MDT. New deployment share. Let's call this MDT share. You can select your options based on your requirements. Click on next. And this should not only create our share but put some of the files as well inside the share. Let us hit finish. In order to make this share accessible, let us share it with everyone, because again I'm only performing this activity in a local lab environment. Okay, so again I'm going to try whether that share is accessible. Now it seems like a hidden share, so we append it with a dollar variable, and there it is. There is my MDT deployment share created. And we go quickly under scripts. This is where MDT stores all its scripts which is used at different point of deployment. So let me close that one and see what's inside it. Now remember, MDT existed even when SCCM did not exist in the current form that it is in. So and second thing is MDT is still free, so basically it can be downloaded from Microsoft sites, and for small to medium sized business it can be utilized as a very efficient tool for not only creating an image but performing enterprise-wide deployment as well. So before we go any further, let me start by creating some of the applications. And I've got some applications here. And the reference package, I've got, for example, 7-zip, which is an MSI. I've got labs, local administrator password solution. So let me create some of the applications which I can use with my build and capture task sequence. And these applications, so consider an enterprise scenario. You need to always have some applications which will be part of your core image or your gold image. These are known as your core applications. Like sometimes they are security applications, business productivity applications, network applications, and together they really form the core of the image. Creating applications is very simple. We expand the deployment share node, and when we see applications, we can start creating applications right inside, or for better arrangement, let us create a folder named core apps. And let me finish. And now inside the core apps, let us right click on new application and select app. Well, my application does have source files, so I'll select the first option, click on next. Publisher, I'll say Microsoft. Application name labs, version I would say 1.0. Click on next. For source directory, let me give it a UNC path, df MDT 01, yeah, and reference packages, that one. So hit browse, specify a name of the directory that should be created. Microsoft Labs 1.0 seems alright. Click on next. It is asking for a command line, so let me go inside and the folder and see what's there. Let me copy it. So a command line should be something like msi.exec.exe/i followed by the MSI name, and then I want to run this in quiet mode, so I'll say qn, and that should be it. Click on next. Right, so it has created that application, it seems. Let's click on finish. Now I'm going to pause this for a while I will follow the same routine to create a couple of more applications, and then we will get on to the operating system install. Okay, so I've got a few applications created successfully. I just hope that I've got the installation switches correctly on them. Now let's deal with the operating system. So again, first thing we should do here is, in order to better arrange them, let's create a folder here and call it Windows 10, and we will mostly host the Windows 10 operating system files here. Now let me see. So yeah, it seems like I've got, no, I don't want to open it. I've got the Windows 10 CD mounted to this VM, and that's what we are going to use to import full set of source file. Yes, source directory. Let me see if I just give it a D. Let me call it Pro A common question is, do I add all my applications at this stage, or do I add all my applications into the gold image? There is no perfect answer to that. It's basically sort of, like a balance between how bigger your image gets versus how much time you're able to provide an image to get downloaded and built. So what I'm trying to say is, if you add all your applications to the image, it will grow bigger in size, and then handling a bigger image will be a challenge all the time when you need to distribute it to a distribution point, or when you need to mount it and update it for servicing, etc. On the other hand, if you just on the other hand, can you simply take the install.vim out of the Microsoft shipped ISO? Well, you can. However, in that case, since all your apps will potentially reside outside the gold image, and it will be installed using a task sequence, the build time will obviously be longer. So enterprises may not always want to spend a lot of time in building an image. So it's always like a balance between what you choose to keep inside the core image versus what you choose to sort of deploy using the task sequence. Anyhow, it looks like the import was pretty straightforward. It went fine. So let's click on finish. It's preferable to add some of the drivers, like at least the WinPE drivers or the VMware drivers while you're capturing it. We don't necessarily need to add all the hardware-based drivers like Dell Optiplex, Lenovo's. We don't need to add them here because we will be capturing the image on a virtual environment. So one of the things we should notice here is, after importing the Windows 10 image, there are a lot of flavors of Windows 10 that we can see right here. And that's because the ISO that Microsoft ships, it contains all the flavors inside of it. So these are basically different versions, different editions of the same version. What we could have done is we could have opened a command prompt and ran a very simple command: dism get info image file d sources install.vim, and we could have got all these details of which index consists of which edition. So since we decided to go with Windows 10 Pro, what we could have done is we could have used more dism commands just to extract this particular edition and import that into our operating system inventory. However, it really doesn't matter because we will see when we get to create a task sequence, which we should be able to now. We will get an option to select which edition or which index basically do we want to create. So we got our applications, we got the operating system in place, we are all set to create the task sequence. Before that, let me quickly show you something which we spoke about a little bit earlier. So rules, this is really the brain of the MDT deployment share. So this is exactly where it decides what to keep and what not to. And as a common practice, we try to keep as little settings as possible inside the bootstrap.ini file, although it's really a matter of choice all these settings can very well be pushed through bootstrap.ini file as well, but as a matter of practice we tend to keep as little as possible inside the bootstrap.ini file. So let me close this one, and this is basically your custom settings.ini file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy a bunch of settings from within the Microsoft documentation, and I'm going to paste it here, and let's discuss a little bit about what those settings does. Alright, so I have just copied a bunch of settings from the Microsoft documentation, and let's see, let's try to analyze as much as we can what these settings mean. So OS install is equal to Y. Do we need the OS to install? Yes. User data location, none. So right, do capture. Now depending upon what you want to do, whether you want to capture the task sequence, whether you want to capture the image, or you just want to install the image. Right now I want to capture this image, so I've kept it as yes. I will remove this one as it seems to be duplicated. Admin password, I'll give it a simple password. Now this is just the admin password of the computer when it's building. It's not the domain administrator password, so don't worry about it. You can skip it if you don't want to. Time zone Pacific for group, join, hide shell, yes. Finish action is equal to shutdown. What this means is after the task sequence has completed executing, what do you want to do? So in this case I want the computer to just shut down. Do not create extra partition, yes. Now remember, I do not have a WSUS server right now, so I'll skip that portion. Apply GPO pack, no. This talks about the log share. Skip admin password, yes. Product key, yes. Computer name, yes. Now remember, all of these can come or will come eventually when we create the actual deployment task sequence. But for now we just want to do a basic capture. So again, this setting is required that says skip capture is equal to no, which means I do not want to skip capturing. I actually want this task sequence to capture the image. So that's it. If you go under monitoring and if you enable monitoring, it means when the actual deployment is happening, you can monitor how the deployment is going. So we'll keep it enabled, no harm, and we will again click on apply. And we'll click on OK. Now another thing that we need to do here is right click on MDT deployment share and click on update deployment share. Optimize the boot image updating process, click on yes. And let it update. It's got a few things to update right now, so it might take a while. I'm going to pause it. That took a while, but it seems like it has done updating the deployment share. So remember, we still have to create the task sequence, and so now let's begin creating our task sequence. What we can do is we can right click on the task sequence, click new. Let's give it a easily identifiable task sequence ID. I would say Win10 C or Win10 B and C, meaning Win10 build and capture. Let's give it a name, Windows 10 x64 reference image. Let's select next. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we can as well create a sysprep and capture, and we can separately set up a reference computer, and we can use this sysprep and capture task sequence to sort of just capture task sequence, or I can create a standard task sequence and use it as a build and capture. Now, if you remember, we were discussing about the additions of Windows 10, which has been imported currently into our database. This is where we get to choose, and because we are trying to capture professional, we'll select that one. I don't really understand what is the difference between this one and this one. Maybe I need to read a little bit about these two, but let's select this one. Yeah, click on next. Do not specify a product key at this time. That's right. I'm sure the enterprise you are working in will have a key management server, and that's where Windows will get its license or activation key. Specify the settings, say Windows user, organization, VJXL. About Internet Explorer, I can leave it blank. Click on next. Now again, depends upon whether you want to specify a password or you do not want to specify a password. I would say do not specify a administrator password at this time. Click on next. Finish. And that is our build and capture task sequence. It can run on any platform. Right, so again, if you're learning to work with task sequences, this is the view that you need to get very familiar with. So basically, this view right here, it has all the steps, and that's why it's called a task sequence, because it goes through a sequence of different steps. Often these steps are clubbed together in groups. But yeah, so let's see what are the steps. Now, don't get intimidated because it has a lot of steps right now. If you keep on expanding all these folders, you'll see there are a lot of steps, and some of the steps we may not be very familiar of. However, not each of those steps are going to run. Basically, all those steps are sort of conditional based. So for example, generate application migration files. Like in this example, these steps will run if state capture is true. As you know, in USMT there is a state capture phase, and likewise. So what I'm trying to suggest here is, although there are several steps, but those steps will execute only if the conditions is evaluated to be true. So as we are going through these steps, some of the key things that we can add or modify here is where it talks about installing application. So this is just a generic step. What we can do is we can go under add, and under general we can click on install applications. Likewise, remember, we created certain applications. I'll call it install labs and install. We can browse to our applications, and likewise we can install multiple applications. 7-zip. This is how it lets us select what applications we want to install. Let me add all my applications. So basically at this stage in your organization, you would only be installing things like .NET Framework, Visual C++, redistributables, some of the security applications, and I have kept the Windows Update disabled because remember I've not configured it as WSUS server, but you can keep it enabled so that the image that you get is always patched. Yeah, so I think we are fine with our basic build and capture task sequence. Of course, we will troubleshoot if we come across any major issues during the execution. Now, there are a lot of things basically. If you want to include, again, if you want to explore, go under Add, go to General. If you want to run some PowerShell scripts, you can add here. If you want to add a computer restart, or if you want to inject drivers. Now remember, we have not included any drivers in this task sequence. However, we can if we wanted to, and also we can nest another task sequence within this task sequence. But like I said, these steps will be more meaningful if we were creating a deploy task sequence. In this case, we are creating a task sequence simply to capture, and so we are not going to add any more. Now, an interesting inclusion would be install roles and features. So let's see what's here, and let me place it right after application installation. If I go under roles and if I go to install roles and features. Now, if you have come across a scenario where some of the applications require .NET 4.3.5 to be enabled, this is where you can do it. Just for demonstration, I will use a very simple service. Let me see if Telnet, yeah. So let me install the Telnet client, install roles and feature. I'll say Telnet, yeah, and we should be good here. Let me click on apply. And before I close, let me show you something again. Let me go back to the Microsoft documentation. Was it here? Yeah, so sometimes we might need to make some changes on the system itself. For example, setting power settings. It's a lot easier to perform on a device rather than to capture through a task sequence. So that's where it has a feature to include a suspend. What it does is, the goal when creating a reference is of course automate everything, but sometimes you have a special configuration for application that is too time consuming, and I think setting the power option is a very good example. So you can add a little node feature called LTI suspend. You can add LTI suspend WSF script as a custom action in task sequence. So basically we should have this LTI suspend.wsf in our script folder, and when it executes, a task sequence with optional suspend action is added. So basically we get an option to perform some additional customization modification before the capture takes place. But of course we are not going to do that, so let me just click on OK, and our task sequence is ready. Now what else does the Microsoft says, edit the unattended XML for Windows 10 Enterprise. Okay, so again, I'm assuming there's not much that we are going to do right now in this step. If I go under OS info, yeah, this is where we can edit the unattended.xml file. And this is exactly where we'll know if we run into any errors for which we have got the WSIM updates. And it usually takes a long time to open up. And as you can see, it's written over here. Let me pause it for a while and let it open. Alright, so it does open the unattended.xml file. Now what unattended.xml file basically means is it's like an answer file. Remember when you install an operating system through CD, you are asked so many questions. So basically this is how you want to answer to make it automated. Now this has several passes relating to different phases during an installation. Let's go under the fourth pass, specialize, and we can play around with some of the settings. Like for example, here I can set a help page if I wanted to. Let me see if I can edit and set up a home page. So let me just put in vjxl.com. Of course, it's not a real domain that exists, but I'm just showcasing. Likewise, if I go under some of the core settings, I can set up the system locale, I can set up the user locale, and there are several other settings like time zone settings, which I can pre-populate so that whenever it builds up with the default time zone. And so really there are a bunch of settings. You can always play around it, and when you save it, these are the settings that are going to be laid down to the system that's currently being imaged. So it says there are validation errors. Now, okay, so I know what these errors are, and these are pretty well documented in the Microsoft documentation. If you remember, earlier we were looking into the Microsoft documentation. So I'll just follow the steps mentioned in that documentation to get rid of this error. So if you read this documentation, it asks us to set some color depth, horizontal and vertical resolution. And that's what we did to get rid of this error. So we went under out of box experience and display, and that's where we set up the color depth, horizontal and vertical resolution, etc. And we see that error disappear. Alright, so let's have one final look at the Microsoft documentation just to make sure we have not missed any of the step. And once we really feel confident that all the steps have been completed, let's confidently close this answer file. Now we have our task sequence. It's looked like it is pretty well set up. Now we need to execute it, and in order to do that we would require the boot image. Now the thing about boot image here is Microsoft documentation suggests that a 32-bit ISO can support both 32-bit and 64-bit, however provided it's not running on UEFI. So let's just attach the 64-bit boot ISO that we have got. So what basically I have done here is I spun up another client VM, and if I go under the settings, let me take you under the settings really quick. So if I go into the settings, you would realize that I've attached the 64-bit ISO, and also I've made a setting to enable this machine to boot from the CD-ROM. There you see it. So it looks like this is ready. Let's click on the run here. We are seeing this welcome page because I did not disable it, so that's all right. And this is the most exciting part. Now, as soon as I enter a username and password, now this is going to be a username and password which has access to the MDT deployment share. As soon as I put it in and hit enter, it should pop up the task sequences which are published, and we are waiting. And there you go. So right there we see the build and capture task sequence which we just created, which is available, and it is asking me where do I want to save the captured image. So again, as the deployment share is created for the purpose, there is a folder called capture where I'm saving this Vim file. Let me just give it a name through which I can recognize, and there you go. This is the beginning of the setup and capture task sequence. It would go through all the steps that we created in our task sequence. So as we can see, it is trying to format the disk, and it's trying to copy some of the scripts that it needs to execute this task sequence, and obviously performing multiple actions. And there it is. It is now trying to install the operating system. As we can see right on our screen, it's trying to apply the image. Let's just give it some time, see what happens next. It seems like it has started the action install operating system. Of course, it needs to download the operating system files from the MDT server. And we can see it has started copying some of those files. At this point, if we can go back to our MDT server and go under monitoring. Remember, we configured monitoring for checking the runtime status. So we see it's going pretty well. 45 of 93 steps seems to be completed. So let's close this one, and let's just hop back to our screen to see what's actually happening on the client machine. Now we see unattended.xml is being executed. If we go back to our MDT server, and if we can open the task sequence, let's go into properties. Yeah, so it is this action that the task sequence is currently running, which also happens to take the longest time because it's actually trying to install the operating system. And once it's finished installing, then comes the later actions like installing of applications, and once all of those steps are completed, that is when we will see sysprep and capture. And once the capture is completed, finally it will create the Vim at the specified location, and it will send the system for a shutdown. And as we were talking, it seems like the sysprep has started executing in the background. Let me just move it over. There you see it's sysprepping the system for general usage. So what we will have after this create Vim step is a Vim file which is available for general deployment, and that's what we are going to use in uh, later videos. We are going to import that Vim file. uh, Let me quickly take you to the location where we actually try to save the capture. We see it has started uh, to save the Vim file to the disk, and it will take a while. This step is going to take some time to complete, so I'm going to skip through some of these recording while it's creating the Vim file, and when we come back we should have a complete Vim file saved. Alright, so that's our image that we just created using MDT. Now this is our reference image. Remember the applications that we installed. And if we can quickly go over to, again, the MDT share on the MDT server, we would see that a complete Vim file is also saved. And it is this file which we are going to use in our next videos while we create SCCM task sequence.